You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, we are discussing Super Bowl Patriot 36, Enter the Mendicant, track number 11 on 2005's Potemkin City Limits, and this is our 7th episode from that album.
Some background information on the particular Super Bowl that is described in the song is that the 36th Super Bowl took place on February 3rd, 2002 at the Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana. And the Super Bowl was the first Super Bowl ever played in February due to the NFL postponing the season after 9/11. And the St. Louis Rams played the New England Patriots. I personally was a senior in high school and lived in St. Louis, and I watched the game in real time, and it was something that I watched this halftime show with my friends at my friend Matt's house, and because we all lived in St. Louis, and so it was such a big deal that the Rams went to, I think it was 3 Super Bowls within a very short period of time.
Right.
But the Rams did wind up losing this particular Super Bowl 20-17. And it's also interesting that the MVP of that Super Bowl was Tom Brady, who is the current defending Super Bowl MVP, which is actually really crazy. So the same MVP that was in 2002 at this February 3rd, 2002 Super Bowl post 9/11 is the same person who is the current defending champion and Super Bowl MVP, Tom Brady. So it's a 100% coincidence that we decided to do this episode recording on September the 12th, 2021, a day after the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And interestingly, I was supposed to be seeing Propaganda 20 years ago today at the Creepy Crawl in St. Louis, Missouri, and it was canceled, obviously, because of what happened.
Yeah, Greg, that's important to mention that this is like coincidental. I didn't even really think of 9/11 when we picked this song last week, and I was a senior also in high school at the same time, and I actually ditched school to see Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and so when my students ask me what I was doing, it's not necessarily a story that I remember. But it carries obviously not very a very different amount of weight. And my best friend had stayed the night at my house the night before. So plus it's just hard to make sense of that being 20 years ago on a personal scale.
I know,
but also how much those events have reshaped American politics, identities, the forever wars, the Patriot Act, Guantanamo Bay, CIA torture, disinformation, the concentration of presidential powers, like all of these horrendous things that came in the wake that we didn't even see at the moment. And as terrible as the initial attacks were, I don't think it's a far stretch to say that the collective responses over the next 2 decades have been far, far worse. And I honestly dread teaching 9/11 each year because I have a day set aside to take a pause from my early American history curriculum to somehow cover everything that should be addressed when learning about September 11th. I mean, there's like the cultural shift and there's the amplified patriotism, like mentioned in that David Cross stand-up that you mentioned. There's the geopolitical and historical causes, which are incredibly complex. There's the curtailing of civil liberties, the evolution of what constitutes terrorism. There's the spike in hate crimes following the attacks and the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas.
Right.
Conspiracy theories, political fights over healthcare for first responders, the interpretation of memorial sites. I kind of dread it because most teachers I know do the same thing each year, which barely touches the surface. And with so much time between the event and my students now, there's just, I feel like much more to unpack and unlearn. They get the ticker tape parade version of 9/11, but not much else. So, so often in U.S. history, we memorialize, but we strip things of context. I mean, just think of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. You have like this monolithic wall with names etched in, but no understanding based off of that memorial of what happened or why it happened. And like any greater detail during the Vietnam War. So this year, Greg, I called off on the day that we teachers were like required, social studies teachers were required to have a lesson on September 11th. So I made an e-learning assignment, and which I felt comfortable with. I spent the day at the lake with my wife and my son instead.
Nice.
Instead of teaching about 9/11,
Yeah.
which I think is like a Sisyphusian task. It's like teaching 9/11 in the U.S. is like teaching an amnesiac, like someone who just cannot remember or understand the greater lessons from history or from current events.
So a little bit of information on the inside of the album booklet for Potemkin City Limits is that there are a few passages of writing. The first one, it was written by Todd Kowalski, and if everybody looks inside of your LP or CD, you can find these. But the first one reads, "God's hand came right out of the sky and put the ball in the end zone. He blessed the game and came to participate. Unfortunately, by the third quarter kickoff, he had forgotten to turn on the taps to 10 million dehydrated mouths. Kids dropped like flies, one after another. Rivers of diarrhea were the only signs of moisture. All things happen for a reason. Bless us, the God of all things brought victory to our team." So this is a really interesting quote to me because it shows what the disconnect is between multiple societies,
right,
and what they invoke God to be involved in within their lives. So like if a team wins a game and everybody is very celebratory, it's, oh, thank God for these blessings. But then, on any given street in any given country, oftentimes within close proximity of major sporting arenas, are people who are experiencing houselessness and food insecurity, and are victims of certain types of crime. And so, but it's the disconnect of like people in the sporting arenas who are really worried about the victory of the team and not the lives of vulnerable people all around them on any given day.
Yeah, what people are going to pray for here in the States or in Canada or in other developed nations versus other places. And, back when I was on Facebook in the mid to late 2000s, I remember posting that every single Super Bowl Sunday, much to like just my family and friends ignoring it. But I remember thinking like I could at least jam my thumb a little bit into people's feeds by sharing that, which really feels like it could be its own song, right?
Yeah.
Like it fits so well with the lyrics that we're going to discuss, but it on its own, I feel like it could still be like a separate track.
Yeah, and then the other quote is attributed within the booklet to Ward Churchill, who was an ethnic studies professor at the University of Colorado Boulder from 1990 to 2007. And what's really interesting is that I cannot find the following quote attributed to anywhere to Churchill within the internet. So the quote is, "When the judges at Nuremberg laid down the ground rules of international law following the Second World War, they described an unprovoked invasion of a defenseless country as the paramount crime against humanity, from which all other crimes follow. And the judges also pointed out the obvious, that violent crime would beckon violent reaction, which compounded the original crime." So this is really weird because the quote is attributed to Churchill inside the booklet, but is attributed to a person named John Pilger from an August 2005 New Statesman article called "An Anti-Fascist Legacy." So I'm actually really confused now about the attribution of this quote to Churchill whenever Pilger is the person online. So something that's really interesting as well is that Churchill gained a lot of scorn online and in person after he wrote an essay called "On the Justice of Roosting Chickens" in 2001, which I bet would have something to do with the line in "Name and Address Withheld" that we didn't talk about in that episode, but which I just found. So in that essay, Churchill argued that the September 11th attacks were provoked by U.S. foreign policy, and he described the role of financial workers at the World Trade Center as an ongoing genocidal American imperialism comparable to the role played by Adolf Eichmann in organizing the Holocaust. And that led to widespread condemnation of Churchill in public and from his university chancellor. and who acknowledged his constitutional rights to express his views, but he found the comments to be sort of like outrageous, and he found the views to be appalling. So Churchill got in some trouble. So yeah, now I'm wondering, what Churchill's role is with this actual quote, because I can't actually find it attributed.
Right. And adding to that, Greg, I'm thinking back to Gore Vidal's book, Perpetual War for Perpetual Peace, and our tendency to explain complex events simply as people being evil, and how much people buy into that messaging and then don't question further what are the implications and what are the causes of terrorist attacks, whether it's Timothy McVeigh or if it's Al-Qaeda. And just stopping there with, well, people did this because they're evil, of course, is going to create a very, very simplistic depiction of the world. And I decided to pull up, because it's almost hard to transport yourself back in time to remember things like what had happened up to this Super Bowl 36, because so much of it just seems to kind of mesh together. So I have a short timeline of events post 9/11 leading up to February of 2002. So on September 12th, Bush states, "The United States of America will use all of our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win." By September 14th, Congress voted to authorize use of military force, so not a formal declaration of war, but use of military force against Afghanistan, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and about 24 other groups, with Barbara Lee of California being the only vote no in Congress. And she warned, quote, "Let us pause for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control. As we act, let us not become the evil that we deplore." So then the authorization granted the president the authority to use all necessary and appropriate force against those whom he determined planned, authorized, committed, or aided the September 11th attacks, or who harbored any of those persons or groups. On September 20th, Bush announces the war on terror, saying, "Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated." September 25th, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld announces the anti-terror campaign as Operation Enduring Freedom, which he says will take years to fight. In October 2001, October 7th, airstrikes by the United States and Great Britain are launched in Afghanistan, at Taliban and at Al-Qaeda training camps and targets. Then October 19th in 2001, the ground war begins with special forces striking in Kandahar. In the coming weeks, then, Britain, Turkey, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, France, and Poland all announced that they will deploy troops to Afghanistan as well. On October 26th, Congress passes the Patriot Act, which allows the search and electronic surveillance powers of federal agencies while investigating persons suspected of terrorism. November 13th, Kabul falls following airstrikes and ground attacks by the U.S. and Afghan Northern Alliance. December 7th, Kandahar, the last major stronghold of the Taliban, then falls. In January of 2002, Guantanamo Bay is opened. On January 16th, the United States Security Council unanimously adopted the Resolution 1390, imposing further sanctions on Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and others associated with them. And that brings us up to February 3rd,
Fast.
Super Bowl 36. So let's talk about that, Greg. Who is on our episode for Super Bowl Patriot?
So our guest on this episode is Jeffrey Owens, friend of the podcast. He is the guitarist and vocalist in the bands Goya and Secret Iris, and he lives in Phoenix, Arizona. Jeff's bands are fantastic, and he has listened to pretty much every one of our podcast episodes, which blows my mind entirely. So I bought some Goya records from Jeff last summer, and we've kept in touch, and he proposed the idea of doing a cover of Super Bowl Patriot 36, and I was really excited about the idea, and so it's really great too. So after Jeff sent in the cover, I jumped on the phone with him, and we discussed Loving Propaganda and the adaptation he did of the tune. So enjoy the cover and enjoy our chat, and then be sure to check out Jeff's bands Secret Iris and Goya. Jeff is on Twitter, and you can find him at the username CreepShowOwens, and you can find his music links from there. So enjoy our conversation and Jeff's fantastic cover of Super Bowl Patriot 36.
Super Bowl Patriots cheer halftime propaganda. Fake titties tooting trumpets, freedom is in lights. Shit's out from post-hippie, call me Sir Paul McCartney's multimillionaire fucking mouth. Machine guns raised, kegs secure, beers held high. The liars in the house, Kid Rock is in the house. We're doomed, fucking doomed, fucking doomed. We're doomed, fucking doomed, fucking doomed, fucking doomed, fucking doomed, fucking doomed, fucking doomed. Ah, fuck!
Jeffrey Owens, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Thanks for having me.
It is a delight to have you here. Something that's really funny that I think we should talk about right off the bat is that you are probably one of maybe a few dozen people in the world who have basically listened to this show from the very beginning. I think that you've probably listened to every single episode, it feels like, at this point. And I'm wondering about your listening journey that you've been on with Keith and I for the last year and change, because you've been with us right off the bat and you've been engaged with us the whole time. And I'm just curious about your experience of being a fan of this, listening to the show and hanging out with us for so long.
Yeah, well, I'll say right off the bat, it's just been a great experience. And I remember when I think you found me, I know that you look for the propaganda tags online, and I must have posted something. I don't recall what it was offhand, but this was before I think the first episode had even come out. And I followed you immediately, since they're a band I'm a huge fan of. And I even remember where I was listening to the first episode. I was listening to it driving out to take a hike somewhere, and I finished it on the way back, and started listening to propaganda right when the episode was over. Awesome. And I think y'all did a great job on the first episode and hooked me right away. And yeah, I've learned a lot about the band listening to all the episodes, and I thought I knew so much about them, and I've found out through your episodes that there's so much more than I ever knew.
Dude, isn't it absolutely crazy? Every song is a treasure trove of keywords and vocab terms that just take Keith and I on these journeys. And I can't even believe how much more work it's been than I ever could have possibly imagined. I mean, this show has taken me to the depths of research that I feel I would do within graduate school seminars. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see the work. It shows. I see the work you put into it, and it's crazy the amount of information contained in some of these songs. Like you said, even vocabulary words that I had learned a lot from the band, and now I've learned even more from the podcast and the band as a result.
Well, let's go ahead and introduce you a little bit. Tell the audience out there who you are and what you do and some of your music projects. Just name drop. Tell us all about you.
All right. It's a little intimidating. You guys have a lot of very intelligent people on here. You have doctors on here. So it's funny to introduce myself.
Well, Jeff, I got to say that I love your band right off the bat. So you're here for a reason. You belong on this show, man. So don't be shy.
All right. Well, I very much appreciate that. I guess I'll launch into then that band that you're referring to as Goya. We started maybe 9 years ago at this point, a stoner doom metal band. And then I've got a new project called Secret Iris that I started a few years ago, that is just coming out now, so people can look out for that in the future. I don't really have anything else in a way of a claim to fame. I'm just a musician that loves music.
Who are some of your like biggest influences, like with the music that you perform? Like, who do you kind of like see as like the people that came before you that inspired you to do what it is that you do within the sound that you explore within Goya and Secret Iris?
In Goya, I would say, I think the one everybody looks toward is Black Sabbath. But my influences that kind of came later were mainly Electric Wizard and Sleep. They're a couple of the top bands in the genre for me. High on Fire too, but I don't think that really shows as much as the Sleep influence. In terms of Secret Iris, I think I went back further to stuff I grew up with, and probably the main two influences there would be Nirvana and Type O Negative.
Nice.
Very good. Yeah, I'm still a big fan of both of those bands. Kurt Cobain's the reason I picked up a guitar. So.
Oh my God. So where did you go from Nirvana? Like whenever you found guitar, like how did that progression go from there?
So yeah, it was Nevermind and Metallica, the Black Album, kind of at the same time for me.
Yeah.
And there wasn't much to dig back on Nirvana with at that point, just Bleach, really. But Metallica had some albums to listen to, and
classics.
Yeah. And I remember wearing out that white Ride the Lightning tape in my Walkman on the bus to school. Just I think I bought 3 copies of that tape because
nice.
I wore it out twice.
Yeah.
So Metallica was a thing that kickstarted my interest in other music. And I think when I got to high school, I met some friends that were into punk, and they introduced me to a number of things. Yeah, mostly pop punk at the time, Bad Religion, NoFX.
Were you into it right away? Because like coming from metal into punk, I could see it being like, oh man, I got like Ride the Lightning. This is so much heavier and so much more like impressive. Like, were you into punk right away, or was it kind of like a sharp turn for you?
I actually was into it right away. There was something in the lyrics, I guess, that I felt. They were talking about different things than, well, actually, I think they were talking about similar things to Kurt Cobain, but he always kind of masked his lyrics in a way that I didn't understand as much until I was older. Whereas punk was always right in your face, and you knew exactly what they were talking about, and you could either like it or get the hell out. And I really liked it.
Nice. Do you remember when you first found Propagandy?
I've been trying to narrow down the exact moment. I know it was at the beginning. I know that the Anti-Manifesto was the first Propagandy song that I heard.
Me too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it was on How to Clean Everything or whether it was on Fat Music for Fat People.
Right.
But I know that I got both of those when they were fairly new. I think it was on Fat Music, and I think that I got it at a NoFX show.
Nice.
I'm pretty sure that's when it was. And whatever the case, I do remember first hearing it and just immediately being blown away. Like, so it had to be on Fat Music, because I remember thinking, who the hell are these guys? I need to hear more.
What did you, so you mentioned you saw NoFX in probably like 93. I mean, that's early. Like, what were some other shows that you were seeing around that time period that you were really into?
I remember a lot more shows later than that. It's funny to think about the fact that I saw NoFX back then, because I'm trying to think the first time I wanted to see Rancid would have been shortly after that, but I didn't. I think that NoFX show might have been my first punk show.
I mean, that's really awesome because NoFX was my second punk show. I went to see Blink-182 on the Dude Ranch tour in early '98, and then I saw NoFX on the So Long Thanks for All the Shoes tour in April of '98. So like that was my first two shows, was Dude Ranch tour and So Long Thanks for All the Shoes. So I was like just a few years behind you on that regard.
Yeah. And I think it would have been that, and the Warped Tour probably would have been another early punk experience for me.
I mean, dude, you were seeing them on like the freaking Ribbed tour and like the Longest Line EP. I mean, that's great.
It was I feel like it was punk and Drublic.
Did you so you went out and got How to Clean Everything, and then did you like stay a fan of the band like consistently throughout the next like 25 years basically? Did they ever wax and wane for you as a band that you were really into?
Somewhat early on, there was a little wane there. I did really like How to Clean Everything, and then there was a point probably around 95 where I think as a dumb kid, I just thought I was too cool for a lot of stuff. And a lot of the punk I was listening to, I stopped listening to. So when Let's Talk More Rock came out, I was not listening to punk really at the time. However, when they announced that Todd was the new bass player, so this is before Today's Empires, and they announced that they had a new album with a new bass player, I was like, oh yeah, that band. Why did I ever stop listening to them? They were awesome.
Yeah.
And I guess I was over whatever I thought I was too cool for at that point. And I went back and picked up Let's Talk More Rock, and once again was just blown away by the band. And then Today's Empires came out, and I got it right away, and that was it. I've been a diehard ever since.
You know, I'm always interested to hear about people's rankings of the records and things like that, to see like kind of where people's tastes within this band lie. You know, because Keith and I have a very particular era that we most are drawn to, much to the, frustration of some people out there who disagree with us, which is totally fine. We're all for that. But I'm curious about your own sort of preferences and rankings of the records, and kind of where you see yourself within the band's sound trajectory over the years.
Well, the early stuff will always have a special place in my heart. I think that was a moment in time back in the mid 90s. That was a moment in time where I had some realizations about myself and felt like there weren't many people who got it. And then I found Propaganda and thought, oh, there are other people like this who understand these things this way. So there was a revelation that went with those first two records. But when Today's Empires came out, it was a whole different thing. And I think musically, where I was at in my life, they were mirroring a lot of the stuff that I was feeling. They got way more aggressive and extreme. And that is what I really latched onto. And I feel like my ranking of the albums goes essentially in reverse order of how they came out, except the one caveat there is that I think their best album is the one they haven't put out yet. That's coming out hopefully soon.
I love it. And I'm wondering, Jeff, because, we just did the Refusing to Be a Man episode fairly recently, and that was a real draining episode for us. And I know that you were toying around with like doing some acoustic work on playing that song and like learning how to play it over just for fun on your end. And, I'm wondering how you felt about, being in the metal scene and hearing and knowing the ideas that Propaganda was putting out within their music. And then, being in the metal scene, which, took a while to maybe catch up to some of the values espoused within a band like Propaganda, who have, pro-feminist and gay positive on the cover of their records. You know what I mean? I'm wondering about like how that inspired you being in the heavy music scene, but knowing the things that you did because of Propaganda.
Yeah. Growing up, I grew up in Scottsdale, so it was everywhere. I mean, it wasn't even the punk scene out here. I think a lot of people they weren't very progressive. They just, it was cool. We had a trickle down from Southern California. So I've always looked at the area as sort of Southern California light. And we're always getting into things. A lot of the rest of the country when I was a kid would think it was before everyone else, but we were always after that area. We were always after Southern California. So it was cool and trendy actually to be into Bad Religion or Rancid or No Effects. And while I think we were still outcasts, I don't think there were many people, even in the punk scene, that understood a lot of the things that Propaganda was saying. So it was something that I latched on to, and also that they taught me some things. I think Refusing to Be a Man in particular was a song where I was not opposed to the ideals that were in it, because I had never even thought about the things that Chris is saying in that song. And it was super eye-opening for me and really inspiring to just learn about the things that he was putting forward, not just on that song, but on that whole album.
Yeah.
I guess that one was later. Yeah, and that one was a little later, so I guess I was a little older by the time that came out. So some of the things on that record I had thought about, but just seeing that CD with the pro-feminist, gay positive, just seeing those things on that CD had a really big impact on me and made me feel happy to be a fan of the band.
Love it. Well, Jeff, before we, before this interview on the episode, people who are listening now will have just heard your cover that you provided for the episode that we are currently discussing, which is Superbowl Patriot from Potemkin City Limits. And, we were going back and forth in email for a while about what song to do. And I sent you a list and you were really, really, really excited about doing a cover of Superbowl Patriot. And I'm so glad that you did, because it's so good. But before we get into the song, I want to know your thoughts about the record that this comes from, Potemkin City Limits, which we haven't even discussed yet. Tell me about your thoughts on the Potemkin LP, just as a fan of the band.
I feel like that's the record that they kind of became Propaganda on. I think it set the precedent for everything that has followed. Obviously, Today's Empires is a new lineup, and they're figuring out what they can do with that lineup, and it works great. There's some experimentation on there. But by the time they do Potemkin, that a lot of that experimentation has begun to crystallize, and the band is just really meshing as a whole and has begun to do things that are the things that I now love about the band. So that was the record that it was the first one that I was really looking forward to since Today's Empires came out, and I now knew what they were about. I was just champing at the bit to hear that record before it came out, and it did not disappoint when it did.
Did you love Potemkin right away? Because it's it's one of those things to where I think the band sees it as the record that's sort of like, a lot of people were like, oh, this record isn't that great. So a lot of people didn't love it right away. And I can't really recall if I was like that or not. I think I loved it, but I was more drawn to the Chris tunes on the record at first. But now I'm so drawn to the Todd tunes. So I'm wondering if you were right away into the record, or if you were one of those people who were in the camp.
It kind of somewhere in the middle, because with a band like Propaganda, where there's some sort of prog elements, it takes quite a few listens to begin to understand what is going on the record, at least for me. And so, but I'm kind of obsessive with bands I love. And since I was really waiting for this record to come out, I listened to it. I mean, I must have listened to it 20, 30 times in the first 2 days it came out. So pretty quickly I was getting what they were putting down, and I was very impressed with it. I did love it pretty much right away.
Why did you choose Super Bowl Patriot out of the song list that I sent you to do a cover?
That was a song that sort of told me that the things they were experimenting with were no longer experimentation and were things they had decided, yeah, we're going to do this. So I always loved it. I always thought it was great. It's always been one that grabbed me. I think it's hilarious. So I think the humor in it was part of what grabbed me. And the fact that I knew right away if I were going to cover that song, it would have to be something different. It's just struck me immediately when I saw that in the list that this is a song you can do something weird with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's what it was.
So tell me about your thought process, because when we decided on that, like you were like demoing versions like immediately after we settled on this one, and you were like, I already have an idea. So tell me what the idea was that sort of percolated in your brain and got you like motivated right off the bat.
Initially, I thought I was going to do sort of a sad sounding country type cover, an acoustic, like sad kind of. I don't know who to liken it to, but that's what it was in my head, sort of a sad thing. And I keep an acoustic right by my bed just in case I need to play something right away. Mm-hmm. And this was one of those instances. I just had a sort of sound in my head. It would have started on an E minor chord. And instead, I played what ended up being on it, that sort of upbeat, not sad country type song, and just immediately started singing the lyrics along to it. And it really was just a quick instant that it came out, and I knew that was it. I knew right away. I was like, yep, this is how it's going to be. So it just came out of nowhere suddenly off of an idea that didn't even end up being the thing I used.
So I know that you were inspired by something else from Less Talk More Rock as well, a little bit, that you sort of like were thinking about. Is there any other inspiration that you drew from to bring this sound through that you're loving?
Yeah, sort of in conjunction with that spontaneous playing and singing, I realized that basically I was playing a public disservice announcement from Shell, and that was part of what locked it in. That was definitely what I needed to do. It's a pretty generic country type rhythm thing in public disservice announcement, and I think it's easy to just automatically play that. So yeah, there was that just I realized was there, and it had to be that one.
Something that jumped out at me as well when I was listening to it and re-listening to it are the little subtle changes that you made within the lyrics. So just in case people missed those the first time around when they were listening to it, you want to tell us about like some of the adaptations and changes that you made, because they're real gems, and I just want to make sure that you have a chance to mention them.
Yeah, I think the real change that was made would be the alteration of Bono into Kid Rock. And, I thought about that. I almost went with Kanye, but I realized that I actually like Kanye more than Kid Rock or Bono, and that there was just some extreme travesty to Kid Rock being in the White House. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any thoughts that you have about what this song is conveying, what the message of the tune is that you've maybe been thinking about as you made this version and kind of read the lyrics a couple times as you were preparing this. What does this song say to you as a person who cares about the world, about our society that we live in?
Well, I feel... I like you said, I've been a listener since the beginning, and I always hear you guys talk about the connections between other songs. And to me, there's a couple connections on this song. And the main one I would say is Dear Coach's Corner. Mm-hmm. It's Todd's version of that song. I mean, they're talking about very similar things here. How this is a kid's game, and there's all of this patriotic nonsense going on. And the other song that I think it's connected, This Is Your Life.
Oh, yeah.
Because I envision Todd writing this song, and this could be totally wrong, but I envision him hanging out with his dad watching this game.
Oh, man.
And that's where this comes from. He's hanging out with his dad watching his game. Maybe, I don't know, Todd's dad, I don't want to make assumptions, but maybe his dad's loving it, and maybe Todd's like, what is this bullshit, man? What is going on the television screen right now?
Yeah.
And to be totally honest with you, until after I did the cover, I didn't even really fully realize exactly what this song was about. And I ended up looking up the performance that this song is about, this Paul McCartney performance at the 36th Super Bowl. And man, so I did some research on it, and Paul McCartney was in an airplane on September 11th at JFK and saw it happen from an airplane window. So that's where the song Freedom comes from, that Paul McCartney wrote and performed at Super Bowl 36.
I didn't even know any of this.
Well, now you do. And I'm glad I know. I learned all of this because of this podcast. I never would have known. And I mean, the performance is just, you know, I'm a big Beatles fan, and I hate to say it, but it is terrifying and appalling watching. I mean, Paul McCartney says freedom 20 to 30 times in this song. He says, I'll fight for my right to live in freedom. And it's just so bizarre, and I don't know. It makes me really sad is the ultimate answer. It makes me really sad to watch that performance and see this giant crowd of people cheering this man who once stood for being subversive, cheering along about freedom.
Man, you know what's so crazy here? So this is one of those songs to where for years and years it would come on when I'm driving my car and it'd be like, and I was like, okay, the yelly one, and then it's gonna be iteration. You know what I mean? And so this is like the moment that Keith and I always run into, where you see a song and then the second you start looking into it, there's this massive story that comes behind it. So I didn't know any of this Paul McCartney stuff because I haven't researched anything about this song yet. We haven't really begun looking into this song. So then Keith and I, what we'll do is we take this interview and then we do an intro, and then we have the interview in your cover, and then we do our post-interview discussion section. And so then we have so many things to look up now. So Keith and I have to watch all this for ourselves, and then people will obviously hear us talk about it after the interview section, which will be really hilarious because we'll probably just say everything you just said all over again.
Well, you know, try not to gag when you watch that video. Yeah,
well, we're going to go into we'll go into some detail on that for sure. Geez. Well, Jeff, I mean, this is so awesome. I am so delighted with your cover, with your stories about loving this band. Do you have any stories of like seeing them live that like jump out at you or anything like that?
I do, most definitely.
Tell me.
It is actually from a time that I was in a band that opened for them.
Wait, what?
Yeah. I used to be in this punk band called Royal Monsters, and we opened for Propaganda on, I believe it would have been the Potemkin tour.
Come on.
I believe it would have been Potemkin. It would have been like around 2008 to 10. I'm not sure. I think that's around Potemkin era.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure it would have been on the Potemkin tour. But the story is actually from before the show. I worked at this vegan restaurant at the time, and I did catering for them pretty often. It was right up the street from the venue that we were playing at, and we got an order for catering to the marquee. So of course I knew what was going on, and I take the order there, and Todd's hanging out backstage, and he and I just strike up a conversation. I tell him, oh, I'm actually in the band that's opening for you tonight. It was the tour that Reviver was on.
Nice.
Yeah. But Todd and I were talking, and I'm at work. I'm on the clock. So there comes a point where I have to leave the conversation, and it sucks because Todd is just a really nice dude, and we're really getting along famously. And it is, sometimes when it's hard to end a conversation and you just can't get out of it.
Yeah.
I was in that scenario, and like Todd wanted to keep talking to me, and I had to leave, and it was terrible. So, Todd, if you're listening, I'm sorry I had to leave that conversation. I had a really great time hanging out with you. So that's my best seeing Propaganda live story. Is not even part of the show.
Did you run into any other members of the band? Was Beeve on that tour?
I feel like they were just a 3-piece on that tour. Does that even make sense, though? It doesn't.
I mean, it could. Like, I'm not really sure what their touring was like in 05. But I think that Beeve joined in like 2006, 2007, because I saw them in 2007 for the first time ever, and Beeve was there. But I think it was like his first tour.
Yeah, I think now that I'm thinking a little harder, I think it was actually the Today's Empires tour.
Wow, okay.
I'm not 100% on it, which is unfortunate, but I don't think Beeve was there. I do remember seeing Chris briefly, and he was very focused on the things for the show, which I've been him at shows out of town, and especially as a singer, you don't want to expend all of your energy. So he was perfectly fine, but I only saw him briefly, and I saw Jord briefly as well. But
nice.
I did interact with Todd for quite a while. We had a nice combo.
Jeff, what does this band mean to you?
Oh man. I wrote out all these notes for it, but I've got one thing in bold in my notes, and it's the outcasts of the outcasts. And I think that's what has always struck me about the band. We starting from the first song I heard from them, Anti-Manifesto, that whole song is, there's a confrontational element that comes up a lot on the podcast. And I think that confrontational element comes from a feeling of not really understanding where people's heads are at, even within the scene where we're all supposedly understanding one another. So I think that's what really connects me to this band. And I don't know. I guess it could be looked at as sort of a sad thing, but I've even though I love people, I've never really felt like I fit in anywhere. For the most part, I guess there are a lot of horror movie fans that I feel I resonate very strongly with.
Yeah.
But other than that, it seems to be Propaganda fans that I feel I'm on the same page with. So there's just something about the way Chris expresses how he doesn't quite feel the same way as a lot of the people in his life, even, it seems to me. And I guess another thing that really stands out to me, that really affects me, is the literary element of the band, and the way that I think everyone who has written lyrics in the band is able to craft a story and connect emotionally through that story. But your question was, what does the band mean to me? And I think there's just that emotional connection of feeling understood that they have delivered probably better than any other band I'm a fan of.
Nice. Can you name drop 5 horror movies that you think that everybody should see?
Sure. No problem. Suspiria, the original from 1977. Halloween from 1978. The Shining, the original The Shining. Jaws. Let's see. Let's make sure I'm pulling out a good one for number 5. Let's go with a modern one and call it Hereditary.
Awesome. Well, Jeffrey Owens, Goya, Secret Iris, thank you so much for hanging out with me, because we've been chatting online for over a year at this point, and to get to hang out like virtually, sort of in person, it's a real pleasure. I'm just delighted that we were able to do this, and your cover's freaking awesome, and I'm super stoked that we were able to put it on the show. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. The pleasure's all mine. I really appreciate it.
Liars in the house! Bottles in the house! We're doing fucking
You know, there are countless listeners that we've been able to connect with, talk with via social media, via the podcast itself now.
Mhm.
And Jeffrey's just been one of those people that is just super positive. You know, he's really into horror. He's into metal.
Yeah.
And those are two things that I really like. So whether it's him, you know, sharing an update about, you know, music that he's working on, or if it's his work reading through Stephen King's
Mhm.
entire catalog of books, you know, he's just like a great person. And I'm glad that we are able to not just, you know, cross paths on social media, but to have him on the show to add his thoughts and ideas and talents as well.
Right. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the music on this episode. And the thing that stands out the most is Jord's massive drum intro, which, you know, reminds me a whole bunch of the work of Braun Dollar of Mastodon, especially like the intro to the opening track of the record Blood Mountain, which stands out to me in this moment.
I mean, you can't talk about the music without getting into that drum opening, that massive drum fill, and it has like the kinetic and controlled chaotic feel from almost like one of the early Mastodon albums.
Yeah, and then obviously if anybody wants to learn how to play this song on guitar, this seems like an actually very accessible thing that a lot of people who know their way around the guitar a little bit could master over time. Like, this is not an inaccessible propaganda tune on guitar. And our friend Clem who does the YouTube channel Last Note has so many playthrough videos. And the standard tuning on this one and the mostly like power chord based riffing is something that a lot of listeners could find their way around the guitar on this tune. So I think that's something that a lot of people could master if they put their efforts into it a little bit.
Yeah, watching Clem's playthrough, I realized the song is a lot thrashier than I previously heard or understood. And I really hear Todd's songs on Today's Empires and on Potemkin City a lot of times more as kind of hardcore, but this is like thrashy as hell. For a bunch of power chords, it's butted up against those really big, bright major chords, and it's really the only time the tempo eases up. I don't know if the song doesn't feel super innovative or elaborate. I don't think it needs to. And musically, it accomplishes exactly what it wants to by supporting the lyrics with this straightforward, angry burst of ridicule that acts as the antithesis to a 4-hour spectacle, right? The Super Bowl that chops up athletic competition wrapped up in militarism and nationalism and consumerism. So it's almost like a contrast to what it's making fun of.
Interesting point too, because this song is so short and the Super Bowl is so long. So it's like a massive thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those crazy things that the event itself is so long and so spectacle driven that having such a short critique that really just rips it apart so thoroughly in only 36 seconds is something that really stands out for me as far as like how absurd the theatrics of all of the events are.
Right.
So it's one of those things that is really interesting that the song is so short and the thing that it is critiquing is so unbelievably long.
And I really love the screams at the end.
Yeah.
And they reflect probably what most of us felt, immersed in just propaganda and agitprop that was just everywhere following 9/11, it's absurd and frustrated, and the scream even sounds kind of funny because it's so over the top. But I really love how it ends with that. It's almost like just kind of letting out all of that anger and frustration based on everything that they see around them after 9/11.
And a really interesting thing too is the fact that Chris and Todd are, both so on this song together. And I often would just describe this one to be like a Todd song in general. But the fact that Chris sings fully the second half of this song as well really gives it a deeper dimension vocally than I think that I was giving it credit for previously. So that actually kind of changed my perspective on this quite a lot, to see that it's got tons and tons of overlapping vocals on this tune too. Let's talk about the lyrics.
Yeah, the first one is Super Bowl Patriots cheer halftime propaganda, fake titties tooting trumpets. And with the trumpets, if you think of like the Monty Python art, where like people would be bent over and they'd have trumpets in their butts, like that's what I visualize every time I hear the tooting trumpets part. And we've talked previously about Attila Hea's Cape Winds painting with Chris. Chris talks about on his Patreon this beautiful, very realistic, like kind of dark but also powerful painting of a space shuttle out like on the coast that he originally envisioned as the artwork for this record. And I said before that I didn't really see that fitting, right? Like maybe working for a progressive metal band. To me, that works for like Dream Theater or, Between the Buried and Me, or something just kind of proggy and thematic, right? And forgetting, or maybe just not realizing how thematic, while not necessarily a concept album, this record really is. And I know that Chris talked a lot at this time about Chris Hedges' Empire of Illusions, about the loss of literacy and how much of American and Western life seemed to be wrapped up in spectacle. He goes through the book in terms of pornography, professional wrestling, obviously television, all of these things that appear to be something that they're not, or they are often represent far greater things than what they actually claim to be. And if you think of that with the propaganda and how much this record is steeped in the idea of facades and the illusory nature of like how shallow and empty and vacuous our culture often is, whether that's the punk scene or if it's sports here or video games or the song itself, Potemkin City Limits, to where we have like a fake front for so much of the parts that make up our lives, and we don't really see what is behind the curtain. And I guess I just didn't really see how much of that really connects on this record. And for a while I probably just thought the song was kind of funny, but I don't really find it funny anymore, and I don't think it was supposed to be.
No,
I really hear it differently now, and
yeah, me too.
With talking of like patriots and patriotism and nationalism, a couple quotes came to mind, and there's one that's commonly associated with Einstein, which according to the records that I found, it was something that he told a journalist, and it was then published in the Saturday Evening Post in October of 1929. So Einstein didn't actually write this. So Einstein told this journalist, "I look upon myself as a man. Nationalism is an infantile disease. It is the measles of mankind." And while, again, he didn't actually write that, allegedly he spoke it, there's something that he did write later on in which he says, "I am against any nationalism, even in the guise of mere patriotism. Privileges based on position and property have always seemed to me an unjust and pernicious, as did any exaggerated personality cult." And as you mentioned in the intro, Greg, how absurd that there is a professional football team itself just called the Patriots. But add to that everything else from American preening, and it's something straight out of like that Idiocracy movie or like a Kurt Vonnegut novel. I don't remember watching the Super Bowl. My dad used to pretty much host a huge party every year and invite over a few dozen people. So I probably at least saw some of it coming downstairs to get some food, but I just don't remember. I don't remember sitting around and watching it. But my guess is that I would not have seen this as I would have seen this pageant as being lame and boring, but not necessarily as harmful or dangerous when I was, I would have been 17 at the time. And even now, I don't think anyone in my family would be willing to admit the faults of the post 9/11 war drum beating. I mean, just take, for example, the commercials. So everyone thinks about the commercials with the Super Bowl. I went through and I found a list of the commercials from the Super Bowl. And actually, surprisingly, from what I could tell, there were really only two that were very political in nature, at least from the collection that I found. One features several Clydesdale horses pulling a caisson. So what you would think of like almost like a funeral cart through a cemetery. So it's pulling this caisson with two riders on the back through a farming village. And that really signature long hair of the horse's hooves, it's kicking up light and airy snow. It goes down a road and past small businesses in a really small town, eventually down the Brooklyn Bridge, out across the harbor with the Statue of Liberty in the background behind the horses in the cart. The horses then bend their front legs and bow their heads facing the New York skyline. The video fades to black, and then the Budweiser logo appears, which was the only time they ever played that commercial. But then they did again for the 10th anniversary. And then there's also an updated version, which I found on YouTube for the 20th anniversary of 9/11. There's another video that's a collection of faces. It's zoomed in and it has phrases. It's people saying things like, I helped murder families in Colombia. I helped kidnap people's dads. I helped kids learn how to kill. I helped kill policemen. I helped a bomber get a fake passport. I killed a judge. I helped blow up buildings. And it's intercut with others saying, it's just harmless fun. It's not anything bad. I'm not doing anything serious. And then there's a hard cut at the end to bold letters that says, drug money supports terror.
Oh my gosh, this is so crazy.
But again, is any of that really surprising, knowing that the United States is a country where Walmart had to apologize for creating a 9/11 memorial display out of Coca-Cola cans that made an American flag in the background with two Coke Zero twin towers like protruding out of it. Again, it's just like the symbolism, but with none of the meaning in the U.S.
And what's also really super crazy is I did a little bit of research on this Super Bowl halftime show. And what's interesting is that the organizers were originally going to have Janet Jackson do the 2002 Super Bowl halftime show. But the organizers eventually thought that U2 would, quote unquote, set a better tone, which seems to be kind of like a really odd message to send to Janet Jackson, who is, maybe I don't know anything about Janet Jackson really, but like it's a really odd message to send to say to somebody, hey, listen, I know this tragedy just happened and we know you're booked, but we know that you can't handle it to be respectful and set the right tone for the event. So Janet Jackson was basically ousted, as far as I can tell, as far as halftime entertainment at the Super Bowl that year.
Ouch. Yikes.
Exactly. So, that was a really interesting thing that I learned that I thought was really fascinating. And then we have the next line in the song, which directly refers to Paul McCartney. So we have the word The line is, freedom is in lights and is shitting itself out of post-hippie, call me sir, Paul McCartney's multimillionaire fucking mouth. So the performance of Paul McCartney at the Super Bowl was something that I had never watched before, but he sings a song literally called Freedom. And McCartney's performance was actually a pregame performance, and U2 did the halftime performance. But among the mind-bogglingly amazing lyrics of this song by McCartney are, and I quote, "This is my right, a right given by God to live a free life, to live in freedom. Talking about freedom, I'm talking about freedom. I will fight for the right to live in freedom. Anyone tries to take it away, you'll have to answer, because this is my right. I'm talking about freedom. I'm talking about freedom. I will fight for the right to live in freedom. Yeah, oh, I'm talking about freedom. I'm talking about freedom. I will fight for the right to live in freedom. Everybody talking about freedom. We're talking about freedom. We will fight for the right to live in freedom. Oh, talking about freedom. I'm talking about freedom. I will fight for the right to live in freedom." So Paul McCartney trots out, comes on stage, and immediately screams, "America, we love you. Everybody clap your hands for freedom." And I'm like, who are you talking to, man? Like, the looking back upon that time period, like, this is not really all that fun for me, but the lyric is really quite stunningly communicated visual of shitting itself out of Paul's mouth. Like, it's just word vomit McCartney is saying, like, it's platitude. And in this instance, it's like an insincere effort written and performed. It seems to be almost like cynically. I know that, like, they would deny that, but it's just not a thoughtful song. And the thing that really frustrates me the most about this song is it doesn't ask me to consider anything other than to parrot back the cheap word of freedom in this instance, which is just like, just repeated over and over and over again. So it's essentially programming listeners to be like, yeah, freedom, and without actually saying, well, what does it take to achieve that, and how can I do my part in making the world a better place for all people to have freedom, other than just getting us to parrot back in a song sung at an event that is broadcast on national television.
Yeah, I don't get how freedom relates at all in any way, which it doesn't, but it just becomes a trump card in which you can say, well, it's about freedom and liberty, and therefore the conversation is over. And whoever evokes that idea or theme then has like the ideological upper hand. So I saw from paulmccartney.com something posted related to this. It says, having been postponed due to the devastating events of 9/11, the 2002 Super Bowl had a more noticeably patriotic theme. You think? Paul used the world stage to play Freedom, the song he'd written in the direct aftermath of the terrorist attacks, and to help spread the message of peace and togetherness. I don't, again, know if that is conveyed in that song.
Yeah, and he's talking about fighting for freedom,
Right.
So it's got like this violent undertone almost of being like, right, if you threaten me and my freedom, I will be fighting against you no matter what.
Oh, absolutely. It says, Paul released a statement just before his performance at the event on the 3rd of February 2002, in which he said, "As a sports fan, I am thrilled to have the opportunity to be involved in the Super Bowl, and as a musician, I am honored to add my voice to the message of tribute that this year's Super Bowl will carry." And I love also like the digs against McCartney, who is knighted, who is a multi-millionaire, like a person who at one time did actually represent and stand for things like pacifism or peace or tolerance with other people, has clearly been gobbled up by the patriotic messaging machine here, and not really looked back. And he performs the song with the Statue of Liberty like a tapestry rising up in the background, as a tribute to the victims of the attacks. I saw online that it says that he was joined by 500 children, each representing the 180 countries that televised the Super Bowl. I also read that he wrote it while at an airport in New York, watching things happen. But again, it very much feels like an idea scribbled onto a Ruby Tuesdays napkin,
Mhm.
or like, an AI generated bumper sticker that would sell millions down in Alabama or something.
Yeah, and like I don't know if you remember a bunch of those songs from post 9/11 as well, that are very laden with jingoism and things like that. Like I'm thinking about tunes like Daryl Worley's "Have You Forgotten" or Alan Jackson's "Where Were You When the World Turned." But there's a whole bunch of tunes that came out during this time period as well that are, similar topics and content, and aren't asking us to think about how to make the world like, a better place.
Right.
So that's something that I think about a whole heck of a lot, is the incredible amount of material that came out during this time period as well. You know what I'm saying? So it's an interesting time that is really troublesome, and it's like I always wonder, like, how can art ask us to consider doing a better job in the world? And these types of tunes just aren't really hitting me in those spaces that are asking me to consider actually hard questions. It's just teaching me to parrot things back to them.
Yeah, I actually forgot about a lot of this. There were all of the different benefit concerts in New York, like the concert for New York City, which featured, I mean, it was almost kind of surreal thinking about it. Following the attacks, Adam Sandler doing Opera Man, Bon Jovi singing Living on a Prayer, Chris Kattan from Saturday Night Live introducing Destiny's Child. There were short films from Woody Allen and Spike Lee, a duet from John Mellencamp and Kid Rock of Pink Houses, and a performance of Won't Get Fooled Again by The Who with an American flag and the Union Jack backdrop. And at that concert, Richard Gere was booed for speaking out about nonviolent tolerance. And the DVD of that concert digitally edited the booing and replaced it with cheering for Hillary Clinton.
Weird.
There was also the America, the Tribute to Heroes. It was a telethon to raise money for the victims' families, featuring Celine Dion singing America the Beautiful, Fred Durst and the Goo Goo Dolls performing Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, and I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty. Again, what does that then imply? Among many, many others. And interestingly, the telethon raised about $200 million. But if you look at the net worth of just a few of the participants, George Clooney, Bono, Bruce Springsteen, Will Smith, Tom Hanks, you'd have about $2.5 billion.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And then the rest, the Super Bowl that year seems to be a lot of entertainment, like which went full rah-rah, to like sort of paraphrase the stand-up comedian David Cross. Like, interestingly, the pregame performance wasn't just McCartney, but before the game, there was an ensemble of singers like Barry Manilow and Yolanda Adams and Winona Judd and Patti LaBelle who were singing a song called Let Freedom Ring. And then a bunch of past and present players read segments of the Declaration of Independence, which apparently has been tradition carried out by Fox News. So that is something that I did not know, is that they do this reading of the Declaration of Independence a lot now during the Super Bowl. But then there was like a series of another thing that they did where Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton read segments of Abraham Lincoln's speeches. And then Nancy Reagan stood in for Ronald Reagan during that as well. And so... And then Mary J. Blige and Mark Anthony did America the Beautiful, and then Paul McCartney. And then U2 did their 3-song set, and Bono wore a jacket lined with an American flag on the lining. And it all just feels so empty, and it doesn't ask us to consider new ideas about making the world better. So many people died tragic deaths in 9/11, and instead of us collectively gathering as a country and saying perhaps we should be better stewards of the human lives in the world, we went full war machine and cloaked it as a celebration and turned our sporting events into a militaristic theatrics full of empty jingoistic rhetoric that don't actually ask us to be better for people across the entire world. And it was just really sad. It just makes me sad to think about.
Yeah, Greg. Yeah, the next lyric then, Greg, is machine guns raised, kegs secure, beers held high. The presidential liar is in the house. Bono's in the house.
And and if a more American line than machine guns raised in a post-Columbine, post-9/11 America exists, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So it also kind of reminds me of that Brian Bilston poem, "America is a Gun." So it's got like a line that says, "England is a cup of tea, America is a gun." So it's just a really strange situation. But then Bono did the halftime show while George H.W. Bush did the coin toss. So that is the references to the presidential liar in the House is referring to George H.W. Bush. And then Bono, obviously the singer of U2, who did the halftime show with his band U2. So we'll get into that too in a little while as well, because it's got some pretty striking visuals.
Right.
So yeah. So anyway, that's what I was thinking about with this line.
And I just saw from Evan Hill from the New York Times about how the final act of the U.S. war in Afghanistan was a drone strike in Kabul that killed 10 people, including an aid worker and 7 children. And Zamari Ahmadi was labeled as an imminent threat and ISIS facilitator, but he was actually a 14-year employee of Nutrition and Education International, a U.S. NGO that fights malnutrition. He helped start up soy factories and repair machinery, transport his colleagues, and distribute food from his car to displaced Afghans. So that everything is turned into a celebration of the self, an opportunity to unironically yell America. Like a self-aggrandizing party and parade, like our memorials that have just zero context. All of that is just distinctly American, like you said, Greg. Like that is that who we are? Oblivious to the decades of military occupation, torment, and terror inflicted on others, blind to the creep of militarism and nationalism into the ordinary facets of daily life. The cheers of things like "kill them all and let God sort them out," and shouts of ethnic slurs, all feeling justified in a contextless tragedy. Quotidian displays of military might from school assemblies and commercials, cartoons, concerts, billboards, fashion and clothing. It's also just tragically predictable that Americans lacked an understanding of what caused 9/11 and then continued to be either ignorant of or indifferent to the various responses carried out by individuals, vigilantes, or the state that inflicted even greater harm.
Yeah, and that just leads into the thought of we're doomed, 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 which is the chant that takes us all the way out to the end of the song. And this is just kind of how it feels to be alive in this world today. Like I think about other attacks carried out within Western nations that cause terror and violence. So people can think of many examples carried out within the U.S. by people from the U.S. and people not from the U.S. We can think of examples carried out in other countries by citizens and non-citizens. But like the party vibe at this Super Bowl, where everybody was cheering like their heads off for, U2, during what should have been like a deep reckoning with foreign policy, makes me feel we're largely incapable of reckoning reflection, change, and growth. And, obviously we can point out to many areas of change and reflection and growth over the last like several years, but like, this is like people who had nothing to do with U.S. imperialistic actions, like normal people died in 9/11, causing previously unpolitical people to join up with the military, get sent to other countries, and maybe die. And what we also know is that there have been like between 184 and 207,000 Iraqi civilians killed by direct violence since the U.S. invasion. And we also know that about 241,000 people have been killed in Afghanistan and Pakistan war zones since 2001. So more than 71,000 people, those killed, have been civilians in the Afghanistan and Pakistan war. So, knowing how long and expensive and painful, and violent and confusing the wars got, this explosion of desperation on just how doomed we are, it feels so cathartic. Like, I don't know if that's how Todd means it at the end. Like, we're doomed, doomed, doomed. Like it's like we're screaming it over and over. But like my translation of Todd yelling, we're doomed, is that what are we doing? Like we could do so much more as a species to make the world a better place. What are we doing? So we could have so much promise, and what do we do? So that's my translation of what we're doomed, 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 just screaming it over and over, is that we have this party vibe in what should have been like a really like deep moral and, you know, action oriented reflection about what this country does around the world and the atrocities that it facilitates and also perpetuates. So there's a lot going on here about like the party of watching U2 perform against the backdrop of you know, of names scrolling up and down. And it's really disturbing because it makes me wonder, like, if there was any kind of consent by the families of the deceased in 9/11 for U2 to use their names, like to scroll up and down like that, like they did on the stage. So it's just kind of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I get the visual from that famous photograph of August Landmesser from the 1930s in Germany. There's a famous photograph of this Nazi rally where all of these people are hailing Hitler, and it's believed that Landmesser was the person pictured who did not salute, right? Like his arms are crossed, that he had a relationship which was illegal at the time with a Jewish woman. He was later imprisoned. And like the arms crossed while there's just the madness around them, while people are cheering on for, you know, things that are against their own best interest, and swallowing up the symbols, the gestures, like the war drums, all of those things without really questioning what it means.
So I've got some YouTube comments for this particular song, but I didn't find any really for the band because there aren't that many online. There's only one live performance of this song online, and it didn't really have any comments, and the quality was terrible, so it wasn't even worth sampling within the episode. But a comment that I read in response to the YouTube performance is this. This is God's band. Another one that I read is, and this is why U2 will always be my favorite band. An Irish punk band from Dublin walks up on the stage and makes every heart in America swell with pride. When Bono opens his jacket and displays the flag lining, tears fall every time. What a class act U2 is. And then the other one, the last one that I found is, when he opened his jacket, it was the first time I realized this wasn't just one nation's tragedy, it was Earth's tragedy. It established a connection with me at a very young age. When I first saw this video, it's as if he was saying, hey, we may not be Americans, but we're connected to this event. We're one and the same. God bless America, and God bless you too. And, you know, this makes me think about all those people that the numbers of statistics that I listed earlier of civilian deaths in these wars over the last 2 decades. And I wonder why those aren't Earth's tragedy as well. Like, why aren't we talking about that all the time as Earth's tragedy? And, you know, I obviously, you know, people do talk about those as Earth's tragedy, but like there's so much more tragedy that stems out of these events, that I think that we should take a moment and acknowledge those as well, that so much pain and suffering has happened in the wake and aftermath of these events.
Yeah, I got a couple as well, Greg. One from the Paul McCartney performance said, the greatest songwriter of our time continues to blow us away. And then from the same YouTube performance, it says, no halftime show has ever come close to matching the raw emotion of this performance. Doubt one ever will. Bono and the lads deserve credit for reigniting the American spirit. Another says, it's so sad that there are kids growing up now that will never understand the importance of this performance. And another says, if you weren't out of your chair or in tears, or both, by the time Where the Streets Have No Name kicked in, you have no soul at all.
Yeah, well, you know, to take us sort of like into a conclusion on this, this episode, like this has transformed my view on this song a whole heck of a lot. I used to think it was funny, and now I don't think it's funny at all. But this got me thinking about my own fears of conflict as a person and how
Sure.
much like war has occurred in the 20 years since 9/11, and this Super Bowl took place. And I was thinking, as I was thinking about the violence of our species, and I thought to myself, why do humans seem to love killing each other so much? It's a question, that resonates so much. Like, so I Googled the question, why do human beings kill each other so much? And I found something from a guy named Dr. R. Douglas Fields, who was a neuroscience researcher who wrote a book called Why We Snap. And I found something by him on Psychology Today in a snippet from his book. So in the article, it says, a new study of 1,024 mammal species has determined which animals are the most vicious killers of their own kind. Killer whales, perhaps? Pit bulls, maybe? For the answer, just look in the mirror. Step back and view our species objectively from the outside, the way a zoologist would carefully observe any other animal, or see us the way every other creature perceives human beings. The brutal reality could not be more evident or more horrifying. We are the most relentless yet oblivious killers on earth. So then I looked at his book called Why We Snap, which says our violence operates far outside the bounds of any other species. Human beings kill anything. Slaughter is a defining behavior of our species. We kill all other species, and we kill our own. Read today's paper, read yesterday's, or read tomorrow's. The enormous industry of print and broadcast journalism serves predominantly to document our killing. Violence exists in the animal world, of course, but on a far different scale. Carnivores kill for food. We kill our family members, our children, our parents, our spouses, our brothers and sisters, our cousins and in-laws. We kill strangers. We kill people who are different from us in appearance, beliefs, race, and social status. We kill ourselves in suicide. We kill for advantage and for revenge. We kill for entertainment. The Roman Colosseum, drive-by shootings, bullfights, hunting and fishing, animal roadkill in an instantaneous reflex for sport. We kill friends, rivals, coworkers, and classmates. Children kill children in school and on the playground. Grandparents, parents, fathers, mothers all kill, and all of them are the targets of killing. And this is what I thought. This is what I think of when I think of us being doomed in relation to this song. After groups of us are lost in tragedies, we put rock bands on stages and we blast it into 86 million homes. And we ask each other to parrot back small platitudes of thoughts, which, and then we party. And it's really just got me really sad. Like, this isn't fun for me to talk about. This is not a fun discussion because it only makes me sad. And my thoughts on this song have changed tremendously with regards to the tone of the song. And this is something that I've just been thinking about a whole heck of a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, Greg, and I think the music has only gotten louder since then, right? The volume has only gone up. I found two quotes that really have me thinking about this song and what I'm hoping to take away from it. One is from Hermann Goring at the Nuremberg trials, in which he said, "Of course the people don't want war, but after all, it's the leaders of the country who determine the policy. And it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy, a fascist dictatorship, or a parliament, or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to greater danger."
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense here within this moment.
And the other is from James Madison, and this one is incredibly prescient. It says, "The means of defense against foreign danger have been always the instruments of tyranny at home. Among the Romans, it was a standing maxim to excite a war, whether a revolt was apprehended. Throughout all Europe, the armies kept up under the pretext of defending have enslaved the people." So, like I said in songs previously for my teachable moment, I say don't let the spectacle become wallpaper. Don't let the propaganda become quotidian. Don't let your guard down at the promise of entertainment, because if they can't convince us from the pulpit to fear, to hate, and to support their violence, then they'll do it through other means with friendly faces and happy symbols and loud music.
Do you want to go ahead and rate this one?
Yeah, I really, as you said, Greg, my thoughts of this have evolved a ton in the last 15 years or so. I think it is really effective. I think it has powerful imagery. I think the music is short and sharp, just as the band intended. I like it. I'm going to give it a 2. And even if that sounds low, I do really, really like this song. But yeah, I'm going to say a strong 2.
I'm going to go with a 2 on this fella as well. Yeah, it is. It's rad. It's short. It's explosive. It made me really, really sad, while also making me shake my head a lot and be like, I can't believe the absurdity of us in these moments of the celebratory nature in the wake of tragedy, and it's really disturbing. Even though I don't totally love the song, I'm not totally obsessed with it within the discography of Propaganda. It is one that has changed for me, and I've changed my mind a lot on this song, and I think it's a lot more important than I was previously giving it credit for. So I'm going to go with a 2 as well. But yeah, so that is our episode on Super Bowl Patriot 36. Enter the Mendicant. If you want to find us on social media, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at PropagandaPod. You can send us an email at propagandapod@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, as always, and we will see you next time.
Propaganda, fake titties, tooting trumpets, freedom is in lights. Shit's out from post-hippie, call me Sir Paul McCartney's multimillionaire. Propaganda, fake titties, tooting trumpets, freedom's in lights. Shit's out from post-hippie, call me Sir Paul McCartney's multimillionaire fucking mouth. Machine guns wave, cakes are cured.